All right, everybody waking up after lunch? Assalamu alaikum. For the Istanbul network, thank you very much for the lunch. But again, putting us after lunch with 4 people will need a lot of energy. Also, there are no women on the panel again, so I know you were saying that, so the feminist in the group. Like I said, there are 4 people in the group today. We've discussed the history, we've discussed the current narrative of Islam and democracy, socioeconomic currents, political parties, 2 very interesting sessions on political parties. But now comes the interesting part about democracy and religion. The interesting dichotomy: does democracy lead to more religious freedom, or does it lead to more radicalization? And we have 4 dynamic expert speakers. We have Muhammed Iksa from Indonesia, or at least give us the Indonesia example. Dr. Imdad Hussain about Pakistan. Shahadat Hussain about Bangladesh, and then last but not least, Dr. Wahahuddin about Afghanistan. My role is to stay out of this conversation as much as possible. We'll give each one of them 10 minutes. If they go over 10 minutes, I'm going to stand up and stop them, because there are 4 of them, we need the time. Hopefully we'll have time for a conversation amongst the 4 of you afterwards, and then go back for question and answer, and we'll go in that role. Iksan, all yours. 10 minutes, I'm going to start time.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Mr. Abdulwahab. Thanks for the organizer, Istanbul Network for Liberty. Allow me to begin the presentation here. I have papers. Since I have only 10 minutes, so I have to very short. So let me begin first with the disclaimer with this presentation. It's all about Jakarta local election in 2017, this year. So let's begin the presentation. Has 5 proposed. First, why Jakarta election? The second is on the survey literature. The third, let me begin with this. Okay. The first is why Jakarta election and purpose of the paper. The second is about the survey of literature. I just said a few things about this. And then the third is mobilizing Islam in Jakarta election context. The fourth is, will Islamist agenda revive post-election? So my papers begins with question marks. Why? Is there any potential revival after the election on the radical Islamists and Islamist agenda? I will tell you later why. And then the fifth is blasphemy law, abolishing blasphemy law, and the last is conclusion. So why Jakarta election? As you know, Jakarta is the center gravity of social, economical, and political activities. And then this year, these elections was like repetition in 2000 and all 2012 elections. So many candidates. We call it class of titans. And what takes away from the last election in 2012 is now the president of Indonesia. Prior to that was the governor of Jakarta. So it's like a trajectory to be a president. You have to sort of like winning the election in the province. And then I quote this from a political scientist that the Jakarta election is an electoral anomaly, while there is a dispute between head and hearts of Jakarta voters. Because there is high level of approval rating with the governor, but nevertheless it seems that the voters cannot vote for him because he's not Muslim, he's Christian and come from Chinese minority, and also not come from Javanese race, since it was the majority of Indonesian of the Jakarta voter at least. And then although the governor incumbent represent the Indonesian politician that is young, clean, and willing to fight against popular stance and anti-corruption. That's for sure. This is the trend of his approval rating. The blue one is the positive one. or the approved one, and the red line is the disapprove rating. So we have two political scientists that say that Greg Philly from Australia illustrate that Ahok defeats the governor, the incumbent governor, because faith-based reason. So it's like because he's not Muslim, he's not supporting with the Islamists. Philly analysis basically, relies on the issue in the perspective of classical thought on relationship between religion and also democracy, including the state. But there is also other analysis that's come from Ian Wilson, also from Australia, political science. He mentioned about that this governor has a policy that is very not pro to the poor. So there's like class relation between of the voters. I want to share with you about the citizen, but I have very short time. So I have a video you can track in the YouTube that citizen. This is the the pictures that if you are voting for Ahok, you cannot. If you are died, you cannot be prayed by your fellow Muslims. That's a really scary, up to that death and life, politics is happening over there. So it's a very tumultuous election. So my proposed paper discussed the recent phenomenon of revival of radical Islamists and political Islam. Why I mentioned about two terms I will discuss later. And then also discussing the existing policy and rule of law that were served necessary condition to strengthen in order to promote established peace and tolerance after the election. So I quote Yaila and Sahin from the Islamic Foundation for a Free Society. So there is Islamist and liberal. And then I also quote several studies from Indonesian political scientists like Bill Liddell. I have to mention here that Indonesia religious cleavage are complex and multi-layered, and it's also modern Indonesia divided sometimes deeply by religion, ethnicity, religionalism, and social class. So the division comes from many sources. And then what also interesting here is the transformation of political Islam. Several political scientists, for instance, like Bubalo, Philly, and Mason, and also Pepinski, Liddell, and Munjani said there is a normalization of political Islamists. So let me just mention about the content of my presentation. So this is Governor Anies. He visited the Radical Islam headquarters in Petamburan. This is sat down is the spiritual the leaders, Habib Rizik Sihab, and after so this picture said many things about how to mobilize Islam in the election. So basically, Anies, the current governor, was supported by the political parties, Islamic political parties, Justice and Prosperity Party, PKS, and also with the nationalists. So Indonesia was a very interesting, one of the interesting case. I think that the Islamists and nationalists can perform a coalition and to win the candidates. So it's interesting that I quote the chief of campaign manager for Anies that PKS began searching for potential candidate governor based off island of integrity, anti-corruption effort is top priority for us. So there's no such issue like Islamist agenda. However, when we look at the FBI or Islamic Defender Forum, we know that the radical Islam was really support for Anies because they thought that Anies can beat the incumbent governor, and their agendas, the Islamist agenda like Sharia, a lot of stuff with regards to the issue of Islamists can be, bring to the policy advocation. And then when we are comparing PKS and Anies, there is a huge difference that both of the organization really differ, but the underlining is PKS and FPI, both candidates strategic persistence and actively using mosque. There is, campaigning in the mosque. Although nowadays the regulation has already changed, you cannot use mosque, church, whatever, the sacred place to, promoting your candidates. But up to that election, they still can use the kind of activity. So this is the candidates, number 2 and the number 3. It's already finished. Number 3 was now already the governor of Jakarta. So also to mention here, there is a case that current incumbent governor is already defeated, Ahok. I think this is the case of, this is the interesting one. He mentioned on one of his services to the island of Thousand. So he said that in Al-Ma'idah 51, there is no obligation for Muslim to vote for Muslim candidates. So it's been used by his challenger, by his political opponents, that Ahok was doing a blasphemy with the Islamic religion because he are quoting an Al-Quran. And then there is a huge demonstration. I put it here. A huge demonstration to jail him because of this. There is a law in Indonesia. It's still there, the blasphemy law. So Ahok Al-Ma'idah case created a huge demonstration, and it is the huge in this presidential history. And this momentum used, for the electoral advantages. And then when I also try to distinguish, is this only case from the Ahok campaign team? They are quite sure Al-Ma'idah case is one of the case. If there is no case like Al-Ma'idah case, they will create another, because this is a political contestation, So the mistake of one candidate is the advantages of another. But the blasphemy law is still there, although there is constitutional effort to repeal that law, but unfortunately they fail. So we have Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court already have a session. The last decision is blasphemy law was still there, cannot be abolished. So several conclusions I can take here. On the revival of radical Islamism, here is the Islamic Defender Forum and Political Islam, Prosperity and Justice Party, post-election. After winning the most competitive political context, could perceive either positive or negative. The positive one is, I begin with the positive, the emerge of normalization Islamist political parties, as several studies have documented. So they are more normal, because they have to, at the end of the day, they have to compromise, right? And the second is, what is negative is what is the status of Sharia by stealth. So they are imposing Sharia law as stealth, or the political science calls stealth Islamization. So they are using Sharia to probe in the public policy. And then blasphemy law is inherited violated rule of law. Constitution clearly stated that it is protect all religion, freedom of faith. It consider the most important rights to be perceived and to be protected according to Indonesian Constitution. So I think abolishing blasphemy laws is indeed a long effort to struggle to create peaceful and tolerant society. That's my thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that the presentation is available as a document, but would it be available as in electronic form if somebody wants it? There are a lot of interesting links. And I'd like you to think about, during the discussion, for those of us who followed the Jakarta elections, we knew about the mobilization of Islamic discourse. But we didn't know what the other side's platform was. The discussion was so dominant. Yeah. What was Ahok running on? What was the other side running on? Yeah. So maybe you can talk something about that. Yeah. Dr. Imdad Hussain will give us the Pakistan example. How am I going to reach you to tell you 5 minutes?
Okay. Thank you so much. I'll be talking about Islamic narrative. I'll be talking about what is wrong with the existing Islamic narrative in Pakistan, and what should be done to replace this narrative with a new narrative. In a recent book, Pakistan on the Brink, The Future of Pakistan, Afghanistan and the West, Pakistani journalist Ahmed Rashid said, and I quote, "But normality is not what we have in Pakistan. To function as a normal state, Pakistanis desperately need a new narrative from their leaders, one that does not perpetually blame the evergreen troika of India, the United States, and Israel for all its own ills." This is very important and instructive remark for Pakistan. Ladies and gentlemen, narratives are very important because narratives provide us with perspective and lens to look at the world. They also simplify the complicated world for us, and they also provide a framework and direction for the action. And the narratives also have implications for democratic transitions because the existing narrative of Islam in Pakistan was put in place by the undemocratic forces, by the dictators, and this narrative actually suppresses democracy and it avoids democratic scrutiny. So in that sense, it's very important to think about the democratic implications of this existing narrative. Before moving to the second part of my presentation quickly, I would like to give you some idea of the existing narrative of Islam in Pakistan, which is supported by the military and its allies in the religious parties. It's very important to understand the existing narrative of Islam because, as you know, Pakistan is still embroiled in violence in the name of religion, and there is a lot of conflict. And that's why it's very important to understand and deconstruct the existing religious narrative. There are some characteristics of this religious narrative that, number one, is that Islam and Muslims are under threat. Number two, Hindus, Jews, and Christians are conspiring against Islam and Muslims. Number three, only returning to Islam can help Muslims. Muslims needs to prepare against conspirators all the time. Muslim needs to turn Islam into a political ideology of state power, and militancy or jihad is the only way to deal with the problems of Muslims and Islam. But most importantly, these are the general characteristics of the existing narrative which we have in Pakistan, which is dominant religious narrative. This narrative is very exclusive. It does not include the religious minorities in Pakistan. There are many kinds of religious minorities in Pakistan, and this narrative does not include them. And the second most important characteristic of this narrative is that it is exclusive. And it suppresses diversity within Islam in Pakistan, and cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and religious diversity, which we have in Pakistan. And this narrative also argues that Pakistan's existence is threatened by India, and the only defense of Pakistan is religion. So, if you come across with the reports of religious violence in Pakistan, you will also come across with this various forms of this narrative dominant in Pakistan. It doesn't mean that there were not other narratives in Pakistan about Islam. For example, in the early days of Pakistan's independence after 1947 until 1950s, we had a healthy debate among the modernist Muslims and the Muslims who believed in Sufism. But this healthy debate was actually suppressed after the 1965 war between Pakistan and India, when national security and enmity with India became the main geostrategic goals of Pakistani state. So since then, the textbooks were changed, the new history writing was commissioned, and Islam was made subservient to the goals of the nation state, to the geostrategic considerations. In 1971, when East Pakistan was separated from West Pakistan as Bangladesh, Pakistan became more insecure, and this narrative was later deepened and strengthened by the military regime of Ziaul Haq. And this narrative was strengthened through the educational institutions mainly because the textbooks were changed, and through the madrasa education system, and through the state-controlled media, and through the institution of the mosque, because the ulama became the allies of the Zia dictatorship. And since Zia dictatorship coincided with the Afghan jihad, so this narrative became dominant and popular. Now, we had, for example, another military dictatorship under the General Pervez Musharraf, who was confessedly secular and who wanted to de-Islamize or reverse the Islamization of state policies in Pakistan, but he could not do it because of the Pakistani state's focus on jingoism and war and anti-Indianism. So, as a result of this, Pakistani states focus on anti-Indianism and jingoism. This religious narrative could not be displaced with a new narrative. So, I will briefly discuss what should be done to displace this narrative. I think it's one of the great opportunities for Pakistan, because a lot of opinion makers and intellectuals and politicians are calling for the change of narrative in Pakistan, because these people believe that until this current existing narrative is replaced with a new narrative of Islam, the problems of terrorism and sectarianism and religious violence cannot be eliminated. So what should be done to develop a new narrative to deal with the problems of terrorism and extremism? So firstly, the Pakistani state needs to adopt a new narrative of Islam that does not support jihadism and that acknowledges religious diversity in Pakistan. The existing narrative actually does not appreciate the religious diversity and religious pluralism which is lived in Pakistan in everyday life. And secondly, I propose that Pakistan needs to return to the mystic traditions, and Pakistan needs to make the mystic traditions part of Islamic discourses and school textbooks. This is very important because the mystic traditions in Pakistan are very strong, and they are basically based on the philosophy of Wahahuddin Wujud, which believe in the unity of God, unity of religions, and unity of humanity. So by returning to this philosophy and by diffusing this worldview among the people, perhaps we can displace the existing narrative which is exclusive and which does not acknowledge diversity. So if we look at, for example, Punjabi and Sindhi poetry primarily, these mystic poetry has a lot of messages which promote universal brotherhood, peace and tolerance. And by returning to this, perhaps we can hope to displace the existing narrative of Islam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting difference. The Jakarta very localized, and the Islamic discourse was used against a specific candidate. While in Pakistan, it's more of a foreign policy objective, right? To radicalize society, to be able to fight India and the enemies of the outside, but also used domestically. Maybe we can talk about this later, but I also have other questions. But now we have Shahadat Hussain talking about Bangladesh. Bangladesh used to be a star in democratic development movement. What's going on?
Yes. Yeah, I have slide.
Yes. It's there.
Auzubillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sallam. Very good afternoon and welcome to my presentation. And in fact, it is dare to me to talk before the scholars are sitting in front of me. Thank you for Istanbul Network for inviting me to present here. So, because of because of time shortage, I skip my first part about background. But a few remarks is I am from law background and see how, in legal point of view, the practice of democracy by the politicians inside our democratic framework. So my second part is the key problem. I'd like to draw the attention on two main issues. First of all, debate on secularism in the context of Bangladesh, and then specifically law, because they are how they use their laws in terms of their exercise of either positive or negative development of democratic practice within Bangladeshi societies. And in that case, I'd like to share something about the International Crime Tribunals Act and a few recommendations. So you see, we have got independent in 1971 and got our constitution in 1972. Fortunately or unfortunately, that constitution also restored in 2011 by 15th Amendment of the Constitution. So what was the implications or importance of that constitution? So you see the Article 8, one of the major principles is secularism. And Article 12 also explains how a democratic government can achieve the secularism inside the society. So they put four conditions, like elimination of communalism in all its forms. Not much more details. I'd like to just point out that in history or historically, we do not have any communal violence or something like this within the even after our independence. But they put it as a means to achieve our goals of secularism. Still, we must say an example that. Beside our territory, Myanmar, there is massive persecutions and killing are going on. But despite the fact, the Buddhist community inside Bangladesh, they feel very happy and reside with us with full harmony. No problem with our this type of communal balance. We are of all harmony with them. But the intent of the politicians are something different. That's why they put it in the article. Then I shift it to second point is they declared that there should be no state religion. It is also a peculiar in our society because we have 90%, 85 to 90% Muslims, and only less than 10% non-Muslims. So they want to equalize how they equalize and balance between these portions. But they put it. And third is my concern here is religion, abuse of religion for political purpose. So they try to reduce the voice of politics based on religion, and this is alarming. And this is against the level playing field of multi-party democratic system. So just a few evaluation. So in 1979, the term secularism has been replaced by this new principle, absolute trust and faith in Almighty Allah. So that from the very beginning, the Article 4 create a debate among the Muslims in terms of secularism, how and what are the purposes. So that somehow reduced by adopting by this amendment, Fifth Amendment, by the General Ziaur Rahman. So now he opened the multi-party system and come and then the rightist or Islamist, they come forward and make organization for preaching or with some agendas. Again, in 8th Amendment, here is something new and interesting, that they incorporate Islam as a state religion following the 5th Amendment. But their intention, they said, it is interesting, we made Islam as the state religion not to establish Islam, we have done it to tackle fundamentalist force. So it's very funny. They incorporate Islam by getting the popular vote, just it. Okay, then now come to the second crucial point is International Crimes Tribunal Act, because the shifting is if I am in law background, so I saw they're shifting, the politicians or the system, they are using the laws to stop the opposition voice. So they raise these laws. You see, it was promulgated in 1973, soon after the independence of Bangladesh, to try the collaborators and work criminals. But the issue was settled in 1973. Also, you see the statistics. 195 military personnel were identified, and out of 37,471 cases, only 572 was convicted, and they were also forgiven at that time. So, but in 2009, they rebirthed this issue, because they say before them only one issue is very vital, because the 71 issue is a core issue in our politics. So they use it through judicial process. And you see, in 1972, after this 73, the then act, there was no single case was filed against the rightist, or I say the leaders of Jamaat, as with any criminal allegation in there. But after 43 or 44 years later, they filed against them as a crime against humanity, something like this, and they executed them. So there are something that instigated them to do this. I think I find just few points. The political strength, negotiating position to go to the power, because it's instigated to the present context, because they secure more or less 13 to 15% vote among the total voters. Beside this, two major political parties, their vote are same. So they are become a deciding factor who will go to the power. So that instigate the rulers to stop their voice. Okay, just few points about the law. It's a very confusing act because of, in terms of its credibility, in many ways, because it's a misleading title. Also, it's an International Crime Tribunal, though it's a national tribunal, and they do not allow the foreign counselor to defend the defense. Okay, then, last, come to the point, the result. So what is the result by their reenactment, re-amendment of this law is a clear division of the citizens. So now two division. One is for the liberation war group and anti-liberation war group. They are dividing the citizens. One is rightist group, one is leftist group. These are big blocks in our society. And it leads to the political instabilities, forced disappearance, judicial killings, and democratic malpractice and tyranny. So for the last, I have a few recommendations. First of all, in a very general view, is placing human dignity over political interest. It's very, we feel a great lack in our society, so I recommend it. Starting dialogue between major political parties to find out a suitable way to transfer the power, because it's a major issue in my society, and remove all elements of division and unite the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So your claim is that judicial system that has been Islamicized in a certain way is now used to stifle dissent, curtail free speech, and eliminate the opposition. Basically, that's how it's used. We'll discuss that. I'm getting more and more depressed, gentlemen. Next, we have Dr. Wahahuddin Rais will talk about Afghanistan. Hopefully, you have some good news.
Yeah, I hope I have good news here. I hope. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I would like to take this opportunity, I think, in this 8 minutes to thank Professor Kamali and Brother Ali Salman. Well, I'm talking on Afghanistan, but where Professor Kamali is sitting here, perhaps I should be very, very cautious and careful, being my mentor and our great thinker and a great personality of the Afghan society. Now, our main problem in Afghanistan has been, this is, if you don't know where Afghanistan is, how does it look like? It's this. You can see China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Pakistan. And you can see yourself the borders that we are sharing with Pakistan and with Iran. And a little bit with China, and then Tajikistan. At that time, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, earlier they were part of the former, or the so-called Soviet state. Now, the main problem of this country, Afghanistan, and you see Kabul is just somewhere, and I come from the Jalalabad city. I think Prof. Kamali comes from the same city as well, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to introduce you, Professor, as well. Our main problem was that we lacked what I would call a democratic space. We lacked democratic space as early as 1960s. In 1960s, King Zahir was trying to transform this society towards a constitutional monarchical system. But it was disrupted, the process, and a coup took place, though it was not a bloody coup in 1973, probably mostly by his cousin, Dawood, and he took over and he transformed the republic, the monarchy into republic. And that continued until 1978, when the communists, with the help of Soviet Union, they basically took over in a bloody coup. And the story continued, and we started a jihad. And I think I would like to make a correction here. The Afghan jihad was not a jihad against any non-Muslim or any infidels or anything. It was against the occupation forces. It was an anti-Soviet jihad. And that, whenever we talk about that jihad, it should be looked into that context. And from there onward, even the fight that happened after September 11, and even if you hear some of the Taliban spokespersons, they say our fight is against the foreign forces' presence in the country. So Afghanistan, or the Afghans did not start this war against any in the name of religion, but it was an occupation force who invaded us with hundreds and thousands of uniformed military forces with everything. So we started a jihad. Our jihad was an anti-Soviet, and by extension it is an anti-occupation, and therefore this jihad is not moving beyond the Afghanistan's border. So that point, I think, needs to be very clear. And therefore, even I was hearing a spokesman of Taliban say, no, we are not fighting, and we share this work with everyone. And even in Afghanistan, the Hindus and the others, the sects, and they should have their rights. But we are fighting we are fighting the foreign invaders. In this case, the reference is made to the U.S. invasion of 2001, along with NATO forces. And I think this is one of the main conditions in the negotiation that is going on with the Taliban, and it was one of the main conditions in the negotiation and a peace deal which was signed with Hikmatyar's group. And in fact, it is clearly stated that there will be a clear timetable for the withdrawal of the foreign forces. And I don't think that even any of Afghan, from the president down there, they would be happy that any of foreign forces to be, an occupation forces to be there. But there is every Afghan's right to have a strategic partnership with any state it wants. So after that comes the Taliban, how the Taliban came, and my point here is that there was a process, which is a democratic space process, started with a constitution, moving towards constitution, but this was disrupted. And with that disruptions, we suffered. And until today, we are suffering. And please understand that the current conflict is having a different nature, and I think we can talk about it in the answer and question sessions. But for right or wrong reasons, happens the 9/11, and the United States decides to come to Afghanistan. And prior to coming, a decision was made, what we call it, in a conference or in a setting which was happened in Germany. We call it the Bonn Agreement 2001. And in the Bonn Agreement, a framework was laid down for this democratic space. For this democratic space, a framework was laid down that where Afghanistan institutions set up by then had totally collapsed, and stipulated democratization. As a result, you had constitutions, you had political parties, you had transitional government was tasked to do all those things, and elections were held. We are moving to the third parliamentary election and the fourth presidential election. And the election commissions, originally with the help of the United Nations, but then we have election commissions, the registration of the voters, everything is a huge number of civil society, human rights groups, observers, women rights associations, all these things appeared on the Afghan scene. So all those things have appeared. So it seems that we have a framework for that democratic space, and within that framework, a lot of democratic institutions have developed, and I think those things wouldn't have developed and wouldn't have worked if that would not be in the psyche, the freedom, the thinking that wouldn't be in the psyche of the Afghan society. But to me, the real challenge that we are facing today is that the democratic process has yet to produce a very organized party system. And in fact, and maybe a number of political parties that really could lead the country to a democratic direction. We have almost around 90 political parties. The debate now is that these political parties should be reduced to 3 to 5. And I think a very serious debate is going on, and there is a discussion that realignment of these small political parties and and they should be all multi-ethnic across sects, across ethnicities, and across. So I think this is basically has yet to take place, and we have problem with the election districting system, which basically now 34 provinces are 34 districts, but the idea is that we should move away from this single non-transferable vote system to some kind of party or proportional representative, which will be. So these are the challenges. But to me, I think the real challenge is that the absence of the political will that existed from the bone until probably, I would say, until President Ghani took over. I know situation was different when President Karzai was in power. He had to deal with 160,000 forces. He had to deal with neighbors. He had to deal with so many. And I think, to be fair with him, we cannot say that he really did not do anything. But the situation was really different. But I think that will is now becoming very much manifested in the person of President Ghani. And we hope that this hurdle is also removed, and therefore that Afghanistan is moving towards a better democratic future. Thank you.
I want to thank the three of you for being brief, because this allows us about 40 minutes of discussion. As usual, the microphone is here. Please come and line up to ask your question. I'll come back to you, but before we do that, as somebody who's been supporting democracy most of my adult life, I'm a little depressed about this. Let me put a narrative that's always posed to me, and I fight all the time. The narrative is democracy leads to radicalism in Muslim majority countries. When you have a strong leader, you have more of allowing tolerance, acceptance of diversity. Look at Syria, look at Iraq, but then you open up, and then suddenly radicalization. And how would you answer that? That's one question. Don't agree with it, please answer it. And the second one is Wahahuddin, Dr. Wahahuddin mentioned that Afghanistan needs 2 to 3 multi-ethnic political parties. Do we have in any of the 4 countries multi-ethnic, multi-religious, secular parties that are that have any power, that have any chance, or are they all ethnically based, religious based? And please line up if anybody has a question. Open for all of you.
While they're lining up, can I take up this question? It's very important.
The questions are posed for the 4 of you. Feel free to jump in.
Do we have secular, right? Now, secular
parties that are multi-ethnic.
In Afghanistan, basically, the Communist Party, if you look at it, it was multi-ethnic. And the so-called Islamist groups were multi-ethnic. And it is very unfortunate to say that after 2001, we started to have some kind of ethnic-based parties, but that is something which can be easily, I think that has emerged, and that is a reality. And the work is that these political parties, they would really melt down if proper multi-ethnic political parties are emerging. And to give you this good news, the issue related to radicalism. Now, in Afghanistan, radicalism, I wouldn't call it radicalism. And the Afghans were not radicals, and I really stand by this. What happens was that we did not have a democratic space, and oppression took place, and therefore there was reaction towards oppression, and therefore you had no choice but either you go to the prison or either you go to the... If people were given a choice to go to the street, probably that would not have happened. But now these things are given a choice. I mean, this is happening. So therefore, in Afghanistan, I cannot talk on behalf of other countries, But the radicalism was because of the absence of if that space would have been provided, I think all the university students would have settled the problem in the streets rather than through another means. And if those students would want to voice their voices, if they wouldn't have been put in prisons, probably. But I think that has basically
Thank you.
has.
Any of you? Pakistan?
Yeah, we have political parties which are multi-religious and multi-ethnic, but
Are they relevant?
yeah, they are relevant. Yeah.
Bangladesh or Malaysia?
I agree with Dr. Rais because we are facing in our society that there is not level playing field. I can say that the people are ready to support the rightist and good things, but they cannot have chance to show their position, whether they can choose to move forward or back forward. Thank you.
Iksa?
Yes. Is there any universal parties that for everyone and every religion in Indonesia? Yes, there is. Unfortunately, the dark side of democracy always happen, right? When you are opening freedom of speech, everyone can aggregate their interests, radicalism there. I think there is no panacea over this kind of tendency, but I believe that supremacy of law and rule of law is a must. So I don't think democracy will create the brightest of the brights, but I think democracy also limits the power so that nobody can use arbitrary forces, right? And then I think I should point out that the rule of law is something missing in Indonesia. That makes the radicalism sometimes makes more voice rather than the majority. Yeah, thank you.
My answer to that has been that focus of democracy has always been on elections, and that's when radicalization happened. But if you focus on governance in between elections and rule of law, then that real democracy happens. I'm sorry for taking the time. Please identify yourself and your affiliation and try to be as succinct as possible.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Rainer. My question is regarding Bangladesh. Dr. Shahadat Hussain, you are from a law background, and your topic is concerning how the abuse of law for criminalized diverse opinion. So my question is two questions. First is what is the role of played by the legal community in general, or specifically the Bangladeshi bar or bar council, because normally in former British colony the bar council played some significant role in civil society in opposing authoritarianism, like in Malaysia or in Pakistan, the Pakistan bar council, like for example. Number two, how is a judge playing their role in this? Is there any sign of judicial activism in the part of the judge, or the judge just follow the law without any attempt to insert the judicial activism? Thank you.
Please.
My name is Qasim Ibn Ali Khan. I'm the Imam of Masjid Tawheed in Houston, Texas in the U.S. I just have one question, but I'm not really sure which one of the panels it would be more appropriate for this particular question, but it's coming up a little bit, and this might apply to every place maybe except Afghanistan. Is there a plan or a strategic proposition on the table to begin to address the internal conflict between Muslims in the Congo, Somalia, Uganda, Gaza, Darfur, and etc.? We know that there's people outside of Islam that are fighting Islam. But we need to find out if there is an organized structure, a plan to do something about it, to address the internal conflict, because there's Muslims killing each other on opposite sides of the battlefield, each saying La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and they're destroying each other. And I'm hoping that is there something that's going to be addressing that?
Thank you very much. And you're right, casualties because of intra-Muslim conflict is way more than victims of terrorism abroad. So.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
My name is Tijani Fatai. from UAE. My question is directing to Dr. M. Shahadat Hussain. Then I want the statement, we made Islam as the state religion, not to establish Islam. I want more interpretation of that statement. Thank you very much.
My name is Abdulwahab, basically from Afghanistan and studying in International Islamic University, Malaysia. My question is from Dr. Imdad Hussain. He has talked about the spreading of insurgency in Pakistan. Aren't you think that this is the after effects of the foreign policy which you people had in the history from 1979? When Pakistan army was nourishing the insurgents in Afghanistan. And same now, Iran in all the region without China, they're accusing Pakistan for the installing insurgency in their country. Thank you.
Interesting question, Dr. Imdad.
My question, Chin Huat from Penang Institute. The question is quite brief, just to write on the last question about Muslim killing Muslim. I think that pains many Muslims to see Muslim killing Muslim, and not just in Congo and so on. I mean, we have Yemen, Lebanon was on the brink of a civil war, and same thing goes. And that really has got to do because that states assume a sectarian character. Let's come back to the questions of secularism. We have been discussing it more about protecting individual rights of the minorities, but I think the question I want to put forward is that would that be useful? Because the Christian killed 8 million in 30 years, from 1618 to 1648, until they decided to say, the state can have their religious freedom, and so do people. Is that a way that we should pursue in the Muslim world? Because, and in that context, is Aman message relevant? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alim Yilmaz from Turkey. I am really confused. There are words and concepts walking on the air, like radical Islam, political Islam, democratic Islam, Islamic mysticism, etc. So how do we make a connection between all these concepts? Don't we have to, in a way, to make analyses about power politics in order to understand the current situation in the Islamic world?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last sentence.
To understand the current situation in the Islamic world, we need some analysis about power politics.
Okay. So that's the answer to the first question, right? So that is the answer. You said you're confused, and then and I'm really being genuine here.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Please.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Hussain. I am from Muslim World Research Center, actually from Bangladesh. I would like to draw the attention of Mr. Shahadat regarding Bangladesh. First, I would like to give thanks that you have focused the communal harmony in Bangladesh. It's correct. But an abnormal situation on the issue is running in Bangladesh. Our minority, particularly Hindus, less than 10%, around 5%. But in the government jobs, their position around 30%. I would like to give an example. In the capital city of Bangladesh, Dhaka, there are 7 government colleges. 5 principal of the colleges from the Hindus. So an abnormal communal harmony also is running in Bangladesh in the influence of current so-called democratic government. They have destroyed our judicial norm, our democratic norm, our parliamentary norm, in the name of so-called democracy. This is an abnormal situation in Bangladesh. Actually, he mentioned his title, the legislative and judicial mechanism of the government for demolishing the roads of opposition politics. They did not demolish the position of government, but they are demolishing all kinds of democratic values, democratic institution, democratic process. This is an alarming form, a Muslim country, alarming for whole third world countries and whole the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the interventions. Iksa, I don't think there was anything directed at Indonesia, but no, go ahead. If you have, we'll go the same. So if you have any comments about whether it's Indonesia or anything else, but feel free.
Yeah, how to reconcile intra-Muslim conflict? I don't think I have a solution, but I think the institution of a Muslim society, like this morning, K. Haji Khalil Stakuf mentioned about the importance to the nation states within acceptance of the nation states as a common ground among Muslims is, I think, start from that. In Indonesia experience, Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah was really like buffering organization in order not the so that the intra-Muslim conflict is not appearing in the stage of the political.
How much diversity is there within the Muslim community in Indonesia? Are they all the same school?
No.
It's very diverse.
It's very diverse, but the organization can sort of like acting as a buffer zone, so that if the leaders can shake hands and make an agreement, so the grassroots will also follow the leaders, because it really depends on the culture of a society, right? If the culture was more like communal, so it means that if you patronize the leaders, it's more easy to maintain, so that the conflict will not blow up. And then I think perhaps others.
Yeah, I think there was a question about how to unify or how to stop conflicts among Muslims. In my presentation, in my paper, I addressed this issue, and my main argument was that basically Muslims find it very difficult to deal with the diversity amongst themselves. So there is a need to have some kind of dialogue amongst the Muslims to reconcile the differences. And secondly, there was a question about Afghan war. Yes, of course, Afghan jihad or Afghan war influenced Pakistan in a major way. But I'm convinced that if Pakistan had a political government during the time of Afghan jihad, our participation in Afghan jihad would have been very different. We became a frontline state with the Americans because we did not have an elected political government at the time of Afghan war. So, in my paper, I'm very clear that the democracy or the presence of democratic institutions would definitely make a difference in Pakistan.
Many questions come to my presentation. I think this is for shortage of time. If I got more time, then it covers my presentation also. So first of all, the role of Bar Council or higher judicial practitioners body in concern, I can say that the final findings is dividation. So you can find in everywhere there are two divisions. So in Bar Council, and as an Supreme Court Bar Council or lower bar district bar or central Bar Council, there is two division. So rightist bloc is always supporting and against raise their voice against this type of persecutions, and they have nothing to do with it because the government formed this tribunal in a very specific, special, and indoor things. It's very, it's not easy to access for everyone. So they select the judges, they select their counselors, and they restrict the defense counselors in many ways. So it was a restricted trial. And everything you see, if you read the prosecution process, you see some judges are directed by other people who are staying at US. So they in social media they instruct, yes, tomorrow you will write this and you will address this. So they are guided by some others. This is so peculiar in terms of process, in terms of very act. So it doesn't follow the existing evidence laws. It doesn't follow existing criminal procedures. These are things, and it allows the witnesses they give an immense immunity to the witness. So one witness come to the dais and say that, yes, I and he committed this crime. So the person will be convicted and the witness will become free. This is against the traditional law of evidence, because those who confess, the confession will goes against him also. This is the norm, and this is a retroactive active law. You see, I don't have much time to explain. Abdul Qadir Mullah case, the tribunal sentenced him life sentence, awarded life sentence, but still got life sentence. Some peoples were not satisfied with this. So they demonstrate, they create some drama, somebody says. So government took it and amend the law. Is it rational to amend the law after verdict? Then they amend the law, and the prosecution got the chance to again appeal to the court to increase the punishment. So they did it, and the court verdict the death sentence and executed accordingly. So it's very unfortunate. So the role is and judicial, in terms of judicial activism, is also there. They are partitioned and something like this. They cannot independent to do it. And those who are advocating it, sometimes they are eliminated by the government itself. One more question is a statement of politicians who was a prime minister, a deputy prime minister at that time. They saw the society is ready to accept good things. They are waiting for election, and you see our election stories. You find the percentage of voters is very high. Is very prospective, because they are willing to come to voters voting center and want to vote. But they say the Islamist, they are spreading their message that if they can go to the power, then they incorporate Islam as a state religion and something like this. Mm-hmm. So the ruling governments think that why not we introduce this to get popular and to get the popular support of the people. So that.
But why is it popular? Why is it popular in the first place?
Oh, because they are very religious. There is the majority. They are religious people, although they are not that much literate to understand the politics of the politician. So they incorporate Islam, and they comment this. Despite this fact, they are winning the elections once after another. So this is the reality there. Thank you very much. I think you got.
Thank you. Dr. Rais, but if anybody wants to ask a question, please line up. We have a few more minutes. Otherwise, we'll end early.
I would like to add one sentence, which perhaps I wanted to. I think in Afghanistan, we have a realization on the part of all groups, the rightists, leftists, Islamists, everyone, that they should really capture power and transformation of political power to be through the ballot box. And I would give you one example. It was last week, and I think I was really listening to the entire discussion that went on. It was for the first time you will find a group of the Socialist Democratic Party, which was basically the communists who invited the Russians to come and invade Afghanistan, and they went and they met with Hekmatyar in his house, and they had a very fruitful discussion. And in that discussion, you would not see a single word in which he or the other side were blaming each other. One is former communists, secular if you would like to put it, but both of them are now talking that how to save the country and move towards national reconciliation. So that to me, it shows that where one group at that time was not able to tolerate the other, and the other would take, and now they are both sitting in the same room and they're talking, and that is to me, I think this is what I'm
what changed?
Hopeful. The safety of Afghanistan.
Their own belief for the need for the safety of Afghanistan.
Definitely, and if you look at and read even I was listening again to a former Secretary General of the People's Party, which he was speaking in London. He said, I wish, and he regretted that why they took over power through a coup, and he said he wished that he should have gone into the political process and would allow the democratic process to take place in 1978 and take power, and therefore that they would be able to succeed. And it would not have led, and he regretted that we have led to that bloody war which until today everyone is suffering.
Thank you.
So I think this is to me something which is very positive for the future of the country.
Something positive, please, Ali.
Oh, I'm going back. No, okay, I'm coming back. So this is actually more of a response to one of the earlier questions asked about the internal conflicts of Muslims and how to avoid that, because I think this is important. And somehow it is directly relevant to the bigger theme of this conference also, because obviously this conference has been talking about the status of democracy in Muslim majority countries mostly, right? My sort of response is that we have talked about rule of law, we have talked about spaces for civil society, we have talked about liberal democracy. And that's where I think our efforts and messages should really be focused on. If we want to minimize these conflicts in our societies, then these institutions must be strengthened. Dialogue is one way, but certainly we need stronger rule of law. And we also need to reflect more, just in line with the very excellent presentations made so far on our own history, which is also a bit maybe different from the so-called Western history. I think deeply rooted also in terms of the differences between the Islamic civilization itself. That is why it is facing unique challenges in terms of democracy, religion, and rule of law, which is different. But I think coming back to conflict situation, we know the answer, and I think that's where we should all divert. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
I have one just proposal or something like this to Istanbul Network of Liberty. What I learned from all other presenters, distinguished scholars, that democratic variations in all jurisdictions. But we have some common things also. So in that ground, I'd like to request to Istanbul Network to form common grounds for all, so that like policy statements, that then we can advocate with the leading politicians or from starting anywhere, that this is the core values that we can start it, we can practice it, and it is not harm to your power to develop a better situations. It is not contradict to, or it is not rival to your getting power. So in that case, maybe we can cooperate with them and make them understand, yes, we should develop internal good spheres among ours. After all, we are all brothers. We are all brothers in our all societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I want to also comment on Mr. Ali Salman's points. Yes, we should move on from dialogue. And I also recommend for the Istanbul Network to make a focus for next year on building the institutions of democracy, including rule of law, but other institutions that we need to focus on. And intra-Muslim conflict is something that we're really upset about, but we are also as upset on Muslims killing non-Muslims. That's so focusing on just Muslims killing Muslims is not good enough. There's something wrong. Trying to end with something positive, but I thank you very, very much, and I thank the speakers for wonderful, concise, on-spot presentations. And we're going to finish early. We're going to give you 15 minutes back, okay, so to get back on track. Thank you very much.